Commander Emily Harrison stood at the large window of Harmony's Edge station, watching the colorful clouds of space drift slowly past. The station floated peacefully between 3 different alien worlds, a symbol of cooperation in a galaxy where most species preferred to stay far apart from each other. For 50 years now, humans had lived among the stars. When they first left Earth and met other alien races, everyone expected terrible things to happen. After all, humans came from what the Galactic Council called a Class 12 death world. Earth was a planet so dangerous that most aliens could not even visit it without dying within hours. Yet somehow humans had surprised everyone. Instead of being the violent monsters that other species feared, they became the galaxy's best peacemakers. When 2 alien races started fighting over trade routes, they called humans to help solve the problem. When ancient enemies needed someone to negotiate peace treaties, humans sat at the table and made it happen. Emily had been doing this job for 20 years. She wore a simple blue uniform with small silver badges that showed her rank. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat style, and her green eyes held the calm patience that had made her famous across dozens of worlds. She never raised her voice, never lost her temper, and never failed to find a solution that made everyone happy. The door behind her made a soft whooshing sound as it opened. Ambassador James Whitfield walked in, his face showing the satisfied smile of someone who had just finished a successful day of work. He was older than Emily, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Another good day," James said, coming to stand beside her at the window. The Altarians and the Hegemony finally agreed on the new shipping lanes. 3 months of arguing and we solved it in 4 hours. Emily nodded but did not smile. Something felt different today. She had learned to trust these feelings over the years. When you spent your life reading the moods and intentions of dozens of alien species, you developed a sense for when trouble was coming. "The council meeting is in 10 minutes, she said quietly. "Emergency session." James looked surprised. Emergency sessions were rare. Most problems in the galaxy moved slowly, giving everyone time to think and talk before making decisions. When the council called emergency meetings, it usually meant someone was already shooting at someone else. They walked through the curved hallways of the station together. Harmony's Edge was built to accommodate many different types of aliens, so the corridors were wider than humans needed, and the ceiling was higher than felt comfortable. Strange symbols from a dozen different languages covered the walls, marking directions to different sections of the station. The council chamber was already buzzing with activity when they arrived. Emily had seen this room thousands of times, but it still impressed her. The chamber was round, with seating arranged in circles that could hold representatives from over 40 different species. Each section was designed for different body types. Some aliens needed water tanks, others required special breathing equipment, and a few could only survive in areas with crushing gravity that would kill most other beings. High Counselor Thex was already at his speaking platform. He belonged to the Altarian species, tall and thin with skin that changed colors based on his emotions. Right now, his skin showed the deep blue patterns that meant serious concern. His 4 arms moved in the graceful gestures that his people used to emphasize their words. "We have received disturbing reports from the Outer Rim territories," Thex announced. His voice was translated into dozens of languages simultaneously by the station's computers. "The Vrak Empire has launched what appears to be a full military assault on the Meridian colonies." A wave of shocked sounds filled the chamber. The Meridian colonies were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful farmers and artists. They had no military, no weapons, and no enemies. They grew food that fed half the galaxy and created beautiful works of art that decorated the homes of aliens on thousands of worlds. Emily felt her jaw tighten. The Vrak were an insect-like species with hard shells covering their bodies and sharp claws on their hands. They were not usually aggressive, preferring to keep to themselves in their own corner of the galaxy. For them to attack the Meridians made no sense. Captain Robert Blake's voice suddenly filled the chamber through the communication system. Emily knew Robert well. He was the kind of man who never showed fear even in the worst situations. But today, his voice carried a strain that made everyone listen more carefully. "Council members," Robert's voice said, "I am transmitting reconnaissance data from the Meridian system now. The situation is worse than we first reported." The large screens around the chamber lit up with images that made several alien representatives make sounds of distress. Meridian cities were burning. Spacecraft that should have been carrying families to safety were instead heading toward Vrak prison ships. Worst of all, the images showed Meridian children being separated from their parents and loaded into transport vehicles. "The Vrak appear to be taking prisoners rather than simply conquering territory," Robert continued. They are strip mining entire planets and using the civilian population as forced labor. Conservative estimates suggest over 2 million Meridian civilians are already in captivity. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. In 50 years of diplomacy she had seen many terrible things, but this was different. This was not a border dispute or a trade disagreement. This was the systematic destruction of an entire peaceful civilization. Prime Minister Vorth of the Crystal Collective rose from his seating area. His body was made of living crystal that reflected light in beautiful patterns, but today those patterns looked sharp and angry. The humans must lead the rescue mission, he declared in his ringing voice. They have the most experience in delicate military operations. They know how to fight without destroying everything around them. Murmurs of agreement came from around the chamber. Over the decades, humans had earned a reputation for being able to handle dangerous situations without making them worse. Other species either avoided conflict entirely or approached it with overwhelming force that usually caused more damage than necessary. Emily stepped forward to the human-speaking platform. Every eye in the chamber turned toward her. For a moment, she felt the weight of 50 years of careful diplomacy on her shoulders. Humans had worked so hard to prove they could be trusted, that they were more than just violent animals from a death world. We accept this responsibility, she said in her calm, measured voice that had negotiated peace treaties between species that had been enemies for centuries. But then she paused, and when she spoke again, there was something in her tone that had never been there before. Something that made every alien in the chamber suddenly remember that humans came from a world so dangerous that most species considered it uninhabitable. However, I must inform this council that rescue operations in hostile territory may require us to adjust our normal protocols. The chamber fell completely silent. In 50 years, no human representative had ever spoken with such carefully controlled warning in their voice. Emily stood perfectly. Admiral Thomas Mitchell stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Determination, staring at the holographic display that showed the Meridian system. 3 days had passed since the council had approved the rescue mission, and the reports coming in from his scout ships made his hands clench into fists. Thomas was a big man with gray hair and scars on his face from the border conflicts 20 years ago. He had joined the human space fleet when he was 18 years old, back when humans were still new to the galaxy and everyone expected them to start wars everywhere they went. Instead, he had spent 30 years learning how to end wars, not start them. But the images floating in front of him now made him remember why humans had been feared in the first place. "Sir," said Lieutenant Colonel Anna Thompson, walking up to him with a data pad in her hands. Anna was shorter than Thomas, with black hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been his second in command for 10 years, and he had never seen her look this angry before. "The reconnaissance reports are complete," Anna continued, her voice tight with controlled rage. "The Vrak are not just occupying the Meridian worlds. They are systematically destroying everything the Meridians built over the last 3 centuries. Thomas took the data pad and scrolled through the information. Meridian farms that had fed millions of people were being torn up to dig mines. Beautiful cities full of art and music had been turned into factory complexes where Meridian civilians worked 18 hours a day. Children as young as 10 were being used to crawl into small spaces that adult workers could not reach. "How many casualties?" Thomas asked quietly. "Unknown, sir. The Vrak are not keeping records of the Meridians they consider too weak to work. But our best estimate is that they have killed over 500,000 civilians in the first week alone." Thomas set down the data pad and walked to the large window that showed the stars beyond his ship. For 50 years, humans had played by the galaxy's rules. They had been careful, diplomatic, and restrained. When other species tested their patience, humans smiled and found peaceful solutions. When ancient enemies needed someone to negotiate between them, humans sat at the table and made everyone happy. They had done this because they wanted to prove that humans were more than just violent animals from a death world. They wanted to show the galaxy that Earth's children could be trusted with peace. But the Meridians were dying while humans were being diplomatic. "Send new orders to all human vessels," Thomas said without turning around. "Authorization code Phoenix. We are implementing Protocol 7. Anna's eyes went wide. Protocol 7 was something that existed only in the most secret military files. It had been designed 30 years ago during war games that the other species were never supposed to know about. It was humanity's answer to the question, what would humans do if they stopped trying to be diplomatic? "Sir, are you sure? Once we activate Protocol 7 there is no going back. The galaxy will see us differently." Thomas finally turned around, and Anna saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was not anger exactly. It was something colder and more dangerous than anger. It was the look of a predator that had decided to stop pretending it was harmless. "Send the orders, Colonel." Back on Harmony's Edge Station, Emily Harrison stood in the main council chamber facing the emergency session that had been called to discuss the rescue mission's progress. The chamber was fuller than usual, with representatives from dozens of species wanting to know what humans planned to do about the Vrak situation. The Vrak ambassador was there too. His name was Scrix, and he was a typical member of his species, covered in hard black shell-like armor, with 6 legs and arms that ended in sharp claws. His head was triangular, with compound eyes that reflected light like dark mirrors and mandibles that clicked when he spoke. Scrix had been talking for 10 minutes about how the Vrak Empire was simply reorganizing inefficient resource allocation in the Meridian territories. He used big words and diplomatic language to describe what everyone knew was slavery and murder. The Meridian species had control of 17 worlds with valuable mineral deposits. Scrix clicked, his mandibles moving in what other Vrak considered a smile. However, they lacked the proper motivation to extract these resources efficiently. "We have corrected this problem by providing appropriate incentives for increased productivity." Emily listened to this speech with the same calm expression she had worn during thousands of diplomatic meetings. But inside her mind, she was seeing the reconnaissance images that Thomas had sent her. Meridian children separated from their parents. Elderly Meridians who could not work being loaded into transport ships that flew toward the nearest star. Beautiful cities full of art and culture being ground up to build mining equipment. "The Meridians were weak," Scrix continued, his voice getting louder and more confident. "They possessed valuable worlds but did not have the strength to properly use them. By galactic law, stronger species have the right to claim resources that weaker species cannot defend or efficiently utilize." This was technically true. The galaxy's laws had been written by species that believed in the survival of the strongest. For 50 years, humans had worked within these laws, finding peaceful ways to protect weaker species without directly challenging the legal framework. But Emily was tired of working within laws that allowed this kind of brutality. Several other representatives nodded their agreement with Scrix's words. The hegemony delegate, a tall creature with purple skin and too many eyes, made sounds that indicated approval. Even some of the more peaceful species seemed to accept that the Vrak had followed proper legal procedures. Emily stood up slowly. The chamber fell silent as she walked to the human-speaking platform. Every alien in the room turned to look at her, expecting to hear another carefully worded diplomatic response that would somehow make everyone happy while not actually changing anything. For 50 years, Emily had been the perfect diplomat. She had smiled when she wanted to scream, stayed calm when she wanted to fight, and found compromises when she wanted justice. She had done this because she believed that humans could prove they were better than their violent reputation. But the Meridians were dying while she was being diplomatic. Emily looked directly at Scrix, and for the first time in her career she smiled. It was not the practiced diplomatic smile that had defused 1,000 conflicts. It was not the polite social smile that humans used when they wanted to appear friendly. It was something else entirely, something that made every alien in the chamber suddenly remember that humans came from a world so dangerous that most species could not survive there for even a single day. "No," Emily said. The word was spoken quietly, but it carried through the chamber like thunder. In 50 years of galactic diplomacy, no human had ever spoken with such simple, absolute authority. Scrix's mandibles clicked in confusion. "I do not understand your meaning, Commander Harrison. Are you disputing the legal framework that governs resource allocation among galactic species?" Emily's smile grew wider. Captain William Stone watched through the main window of his ship as something incredible happened in the asteroid field ahead of them. What everyone in the galaxy thought were simple mining stations began to change shape before his eyes. William had been a ship captain for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. Massive structures that looked like rock processing plants suddenly opened up like giant metal flowers. Weapon systems that had been hidden inside fake mining equipment rotated into position. Ships that everyone believed were cargo haulers shed their outer shells, revealing military armor and guns that could destroy entire fleets. "How many of these hidden bases do we have?" asked Commander Rebecca Mills, standing beside William on the bridge. Rebecca was Admiral Mitchell's second in command, a woman with red hair and sharp blue eyes who had spent her career learning how to fight wars that nobody wanted to admit were wars. William looked at his computer screen, which showed dozens of similar transformations happening across 3 different star systems. Mining stations becoming weapons platforms. Cargo ships revealing themselves as warships. Research facilities activating defense systems that could protect entire planets. "Enough," William said quietly. The real question is whether the galaxy is ready to see what we have been hiding from them for 50 years. On the surface of Meridian Prime, Major David Clark led his soldiers through what used to be a beautiful city park. Now it was a refugee camp where thousands of Meridian civilians sat behind wire fences, waiting to be loaded onto Vrak transport ships. The Meridians were a gentle people who looked somewhat like humans but with longer arms and skin that changed color based on their emotions. Right now, most of them showed the gray color of despair. David was a career soldier who had joined the human military when he was 20 years old. He had fought in the border conflicts, the trade wars, and the peacekeeping missions that most civilians never heard about. But for the last 15 years he had been trained in what the military called humanitarian operations, fighting wars while trying to save as many innocent people as possible. His soldiers moved differently now than they had during their peacekeeping missions. Gone was the slow, careful pace they used when they were trying not to scare alien civilians. These men and women moved like hunters who had remembered they were predators. They spread out across the area in patterns that made their alien allies uncomfortable, because those patterns were designed for killing, not protecting. "Sir," said Sergeant Mary Johnson, speaking quietly into her communication device. "The Vrak defensive positions are exactly where our psychological profiles predicted they would be. They are following standard territorial dominance patterns." David nodded. For 30 years, human military schools had been studying every alien species in the galaxy. Not as enemies exactly, but as puzzles to be solved. Human researchers had written thousands of pages about how different species thought, how they made decisions, and how they would react in various situations. This research had been used to make humans better diplomats and peacekeepers. Now it was being used for something else entirely. The Vrak had set up their defensive positions on the high ground around the refugee camp, just as human analysts had predicted they would. Vrak psychology was based on dominance and control, so they always tried to position themselves where they could look down on their enemies. It made them feel powerful and secure. It also made them easy targets for soldiers who understood their psychology better than they understood it themselves. "Begin Phase 1, David said into his communicator. Miles above the planet, General Thack stood in the command center of his massive battle cruiser, staring at displays that made no sense to him. Thack was a veteran Vrak commander who had conquered 17 worlds over his long career. He understood war, territory, and power. He had never lost a battle against civilized species. But the humans were not fighting like any civilized species he had ever encountered. "General," said his communications officer, a younger Vrak whose shell had not yet hardened into the deep black color of a full adult. "We are receiving reports of equipment failures across all our ground positions. Weapons systems are going offline, communication arrays are failing, and our transport vehicles are breaking down." Thack's mandibles clicked in confusion. Equipment failures happened in war, but not like this. Not in perfect patterns that seemed designed to cause maximum disruption with minimum actual damage. It was almost as if the humans knew exactly which systems to target to make Vrak operations impossible without actually destroying anything valuable. "What about our supply convoys?" Thack asked. "Sir, that is the strangest part. Our supply ships are reaching their destinations on schedule, but when we open them, they are empty. The food, ammunition, and medical supplies are simply gone. But there are no signs of theft or damage to the containers." Thack felt a chill run through his body that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. In 300 years of Vrak military history, no enemy had ever been able to intercept their supplies without leaving evidence of how they had done it. The Vrak were experts at tracking, hunting, and controlling territory. They should have been able to find any enemy that was stealing from them. Unless that enemy understood Vrak behavior better than the Vrak understood it themselves. Admiral Thomas Mitchell stood on his flagship's bridge, reading reports from human forces throughout the Meridian system. His ships had been in position for only 6 days, but already the Vrak military presence was beginning to fall apart. "Sir," said his communications officer, Lieutenant Brian Wright, "we are intercepting Vrak military transmissions. They are asking their commanders what humans are doing to them." Thomas almost smiled. The Vrak thought they were fighting a war, but humans were not fighting them. Humans were solving them. For 50 years, human diplomats had been studying alien psychology to make peace. Human military strategists had been doing the same thing to prepare for war. The Vrak military operated on principles of dominance, territory control, and psychological intimidation. They expected their enemies to either run away in fear or challenge them to direct combat. They had never faced an enemy that simply made their entire military structure stop working by removing the things it needed to function. Food supplies were being redirected to Meridian civilians through networks the Vrak could not detect. Communication systems were failing because humans had learned to disrupt them without damaging them, making repairs impossible. Transport vehicles were breaking down because human engineers understood VRAC technology better than many VRAC technicians did. "Lieutenant Wright," Thomas said calmly. "Send a message to General Thack on the VRAC command ship. Use their own language and make sure the translation is perfect." "What should the message say, sir?" Thomas looked out at the stars, thinking about 50 years of human diplomacy. 50 years of proving that humans could be trusted with peace. 50 years of showing the galaxy that Earth's children were more than just violent animals. The VRAC Empire had ruled through fear for 300 years. Their military doctrine was simple and effective. Appears so terrifying that enemies would surrender before fighting even began. Their soldiers wore black armor that made them look like giant insects. Their ships were built to look like the predators from their home world. When VRAC armies arrived at a planet, most civilized species would give up immediately rather than face creatures that looked like living nightmares. Colonel Patrick Hughes crouched behind the broken wall of what had once been a Meridian school, watching VRAC patrol patterns through his electronic scope. Patrick was a quiet man with brown hair and steady hands who had spent 15 years studying how different alien species fought wars. Beside him, Captain Jennifer Davis worked with her portable computer, coordinating with human psychological warfare specialists on the ships in orbit above them. "Pattern analysis complete," Jennifer whispered into her communication device. She was a small woman with black hair who had earned 3 degrees in alien psychology before joining the military. VRAC decision-making follows predictable hierarchical structures. Fear response triggers are completely mapped. Patrick nodded without taking his eyes off the VRAC patrol. The aliens moved in perfect formation, their 6 legs carrying them in the precise patterns that their military manuals required. They believed that following exact procedures would make them unbeatable, because that approach had worked for them for centuries. They did not understand that humans had been studying those exact procedures for decades. "Send the signal," Patrick said quietly. Across the city, human soldiers who had been hiding in buildings and underground tunnels began to move. But they were not attacking the VRAC directly. Instead, they were targeting something much more important: the things that made VRAC military operations possible. The first sign that something had changed came when VRAC patrols began reporting equipment failures. Communication devices that had worked perfectly for years suddenly stopped functioning. Transport vehicles that had never broken down began having mechanical problems at exactly the wrong moments. Food supplies that should have lasted for weeks spoiled overnight. General Thack stood in his command center, staring at reports that made no tactical sense. He was a veteran of dozens of military campaigns, and he had never seen anything like what was happening to his forces. The humans were not fighting like any civilized species should fight. They were not challenging the VRAC to direct combat. They were not trying to match force with force. Instead, they were making the VRAC military machine simply stop working. "General," reported his supply officer, a nervous young VRAC whose mandibles clicked with anxiety. "Our food convoys are arriving on schedule, but the supplies are being redistributed to Meridian civilians before our soldiers can retrieve them. We cannot determine how this is happening." "What about our communication networks?" Thack demanded. "Sir, our communication arrays are experiencing systematic failures. Not damage that we can repair, but complete system breakdowns that our engineers cannot explain. It is as if the humans understand our technology better than we do." Thack felt something he had never experienced in his long military career: helplessness. The VRAC way of war was based on strength, intimidation, and direct confrontation. They conquered enemies by being more frightening and more powerful than anyone else. But the humans were not trying to be more frightening or more powerful. They were simply making it impossible for VRAC forces to function at all. In the underground tunnels beneath Meridian Prime, Major David Clark led a team of human engineers through the planet's infrastructure systems. David had grown up on Earth, where survival often meant understanding how complex systems worked and how to fix them when they broke. That knowledge was proving very useful in a completely different way. "The VRAC have connected their military systems to the planet's power grid," reported Sergeant Mary Johnson, studying her scanner readings. "They are using Meridian infrastructure to support their occupation forces." David smiled grimly. The VRAC thought they were being clever by using existing planetary systems instead of building their own. It saved them time and resources, and it meant they could focus their efforts on controlling the population instead of maintaining basic services. But it also meant that humans who understood infrastructure could control the VRAC forces by controlling the systems they depended on. "Phase 3 is a go," David said into his communicator. Across the planet, Vrak bases began experiencing problems that their commanders could not understand. Climate control systems that kept Vrak soldiers comfortable in alien environments began producing temperatures that were too hot or too cold. Water purification systems that made local water safe for Vrak consumption started producing liquid that made soldiers sick. Transportation systems that moved troops and supplies between bases simply stopped working, leaving Vrak forces stranded in positions they could not maintain. The humans were not destroying these systems. That would have been visible, obvious, and easy to repair. Instead, they were modifying the systems in ways that made them work against the Vrak while appearing to function normally. General Thak received a communication from his home world asking for a status report on the Meridian operation. For the first time in his career, he did not know what to tell his superiors. His forces were not being defeated in battle. They were not being driven away by superior firepower. Instead, they were being systematically isolated, deprived of supplies, and rendered incapable of carrying out their mission. "Sir," said his intelligence officer, approaching with visible reluctance, "we have intercepted human military communications. They are referring to their operations here as problem-solving exercises." Thak's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Problem-solving exercises?" "Yes, sir. They appear to view our occupation of the Meridian worlds not as a military challenge to be defeated, but as a puzzle to be solved. They are applying what they call systematic solutions to remove our ability to maintain our presence here. For 3 centuries, the Vrak had been the predators of the galaxy. They conquered through strength and fear, and other species either submitted or were destroyed. But humans were not behaving like prey animals. They were not even behaving like competing predators. They were behaving like something the Vrak had never encountered before. A species that treated warfare as an intellectual exercise rather than a test of strength. Admiral Thomas Mitchell stood on his bridge, reviewing reports from human forces throughout the Meridian system. In just 2 weeks, his people had managed to make Vrak military operations nearly impossible without firing a single shot in direct combat. Vrak soldiers were hungry because their food was being redirected to feed Meridian civilians. Vrak commanders could not communicate with each other because their networks had been quietly compromised. Vrak vehicles and equipment were breaking down faster than Vrak engineers could repair them. "Sir," said Lieutenant Brian Wright, "we are receiving surrender requests from 17 different Vrak commanders." The council chambers had never been so quiet in all the years since the Galactic Council was formed. Representatives from 43 different species sat in their specially designed seats, but none of them were making the usual sounds of conversation, discussion, or debate. Instead, they all stared at the large screens that showed the after-action reports from the Meridian system. The Vrak Empire, a military power that had dominated 3 entire sectors of space for over 3 centuries, had been completely removed from the Meridian worlds in less than 60 days. Not destroyed, not defeated in massive battles, but simply made to leave by having their ability to function as an occupying force methodically taken apart. Commander Emily Harrison stood at the human-speaking platform, wearing the same simple blue uniform she had worn for 20 years of diplomatic service. Her brown hair was still pulled back in the same neat style. Her green eyes still held the same calm patience that had made her famous for solving impossible problems between alien species. But every representative in the chamber now saw something they had somehow missed for 50 years. Behind that diplomatic calm was something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. "The Meridian colonies have been fully liberated," Emily reported in the same measured tone she had used to announce trade agreements and peace treaties for decades. "All Meridian civilians have been freed from Vrak labor camps and returned to their families. Vrak military forces have withdrawn completely to their original territory. War reparations have been negotiated and accepted by the Meridian government." High Counselor Thex leaned forward in his seat, his Alterian skin showing the nervous purple patterns that meant he was deeply worried. "Commander Harrison, the efficiency of human military operations has surprised many council members. Perhaps we should discuss new protocols for future humanitarian interventions." Emily turned her calm gaze toward Thex, and he immediately understood why other species had once feared humans before they became diplomats. "No new protocols are necessary, High Counselor. Humanity's role in the galactic community remains exactly the same as it has been for 50 years. We will continue to serve as mediators, peacekeepers, and diplomatic facilitators." Prime Minister Vorth of the Crystal Collective stood up slowly, his crystalline body reflecting light in patterns that showed uncertainty and fear. "But your military capabilities? We never realized that humans possessed such advanced strategic thinking." Emily smiled the same polite diplomatic smile that had helped negotiate peace between species that had been enemies for thousands of years. But now every alien in the chamber understood that there was something behind that smile that they had never seen before. "We spent 50 years proving that we could be trusted with your peace," Emily said quietly. "We spent 50 days proving why you should never force us to choose war instead." In the gallery above the main chamber, Admiral Thomas Mitchell sat with several other human military officers, watching Emily address the council. Beside him, Captain William Stone leaned over and whispered, "Do you think they will treat us differently now?" Thomas looked around the chamber, observing how the alien representatives watched Emily. The careful respect was still there, the same deference they had always shown to human diplomatic skill. But now that respect carried a weight it had never possessed before. Every species in the galaxy now understood that when humans were being diplomatic, it was because they chose to be diplomatic, not because they had no other options. "They will treat us exactly the same," Thomas whispered back. "Because now they understand that we allow them to." Emily finished her official report and stepped away from the speaking platform. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the area where the Vrak delegation sat. The Vrak had sent a new ambassador to replace Skrix, who had been recalled to their home world in disgrace. The new ambassador was smaller, younger, and clearly much more nervous than his predecessor had been. "Commander Harrison," the new Vrak ambassador said in barely audible tones. "We wish to formally apologize for our previous misunderstanding of human nature. We did not realize." Emily stopped walking and turned to face the insectoid diplomat. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, not anger, not satisfaction, but the patient acknowledgement of a lesson that had been learned at great cost. "There was no misunderstanding," she said softly. "You saw exactly what we wanted you to see for 50 years. Your mistake was thinking that was all there was to see." The Vrak ambassador's mandibles clicked nervously. "We understand now that humans are far more dangerous than we believed." Emily shook her head slightly. "No, Ambassador. You still do not understand. We are not more dangerous than you believed. We are exactly as dangerous as we have always been. The difference is that for 50 years, we chose not to show you what that meant." As Emily left the chamber, the council remained in stunned silence. Slowly, representatives began to whisper to each other in their own languages, but the conversations all centered around the same realization. For 50 years, they had thought they understood humanity's place in the galactic community. Humans were the helpful diplomats from the dangerous world who had somehow become civilized enough to be trusted with important negotiations. Now they understood that they had been looking at the situation backwards. Humans had not become civilized enough to be trusted with diplomacy. They had become powerful enough to choose diplomacy over other options. The hegemony representative, a tall purple creature with too many eyes, spoke to his aide in their musical language. "We must review all of our military assessments of human capabilities. If they could do this to the Vrak, what could they do to us?" Similar conversations were happening throughout the chamber. Species that had considered humans useful but ultimately controllable were now reconsidering their entire relationship with Earth's children. The humans would continue to mediate disputes, negotiate treaties, and maintain galactic peace just as they had for 50 years. But now everyone knew that when a human diplomat smiled and offered to help solve a problem, that offer came with the implicit understanding that there were other ways to solve problems if diplomacy failed. 3 hours later, Emily sat in her private office on Harmony's Edge Station, reviewing requests for human diplomatic assistance that had begun arriving within minutes of her address to the council. 17 different species had suddenly decided they needed human mediators to help resolve disputes they had been ignoring for decades. James Whitfield knocked on her door and entered with a cup of tea and a bemused expression. "It seems that our diplomatic services have become much more popular very quickly," he said, setting the tea on her desk. Emily accepted the tea gratefully and looked out her window at the stars. "Fear is a powerful motivator, James. But it is not a foundation for lasting peace. These species are requesting our help now because they are afraid of what might happen if they do not. That fear will fade with time." "And then what happens?" Emily sipped her tea and considered the question. "Then we will be back to where we started 50 years ago.